It's being reported this morning that the hearing against Manchester City on the 115 alleged breaches of Premier League rules is set to start next month. The outcome known early in the new year. As far as I gather, you think the timing is out there, that is unlikely.
Well, I think there's a few things about the piece that are probably not quite right. The date is unlikely to have moved recently. You're talking about, if you do believe the headlines of the article, which is that we're going into effectively a 10-week mini trial in front of this Premier League panel. 10 weeks is an enormous length for a civil commercial trial.
Yeah,
a bit more common in criminal, but in civil matters and commercial matters, 10 weeks is a very, very long time. So that will have needed to have been booked in with the range of barristers in particular that are around the table. From the panel themselves, there's probably 2 or 3 barristers on the panel, cases, and then you'll have maybe 8 other barristers in the room. So all of that time will have been blocked out of their diaries some time ago. So it's very unlikely that the thing has shifted around in terms of its timing. It's probably been in the diary for a while at that time. And if it is 10 weeks, and if it is that level of hearing, then it will take quite some time for the panel to write up their decision and their written reasons. And partly the reason for that is, one, clearly there's a complexity, and clearly they're going to hear a lot of evidence and a lot of submission over the 10 weeks. But also it's going to form the basis of any appeal that might come. So if they were to, in that decision, let's say, worst case for City, that they find against City completely, the basis of the appeal is going to be the written decision. So City will pore over the detail of that written decision and try and find chinks in the armour of the original decision to challenge its appeal. And it's exactly what happened when Everton went to appeal on their PSR case. They brought in probably best in the business as their KC, and they pored over all of the detail of the first hearing. And remember, even in that Everton hearing, I think it was 5 days, I think the first Everton hearing, it then took over a month to get the decision. The decision was about 65 pages long, and then it took some time to get the appeal. So you get a feel for just how much work is going to go into that decision from the panel and how long it will therefore take.
So how likely is it we'll get an outcome to the hearing? We'll know the outcome by the end of this season?
I think we'll certainly get an initial decision, I think, by the end of the season, because I think they will set it up with that panel to make sure that they do get an outcome, so that they will diarise sufficient time for that panel to have in their diaries time for them to consider and to write up a decision, because everybody knows that we've really got to get on with this once the hearing has been heard. I think the thing that I take slight disagreement with is that this will come in at the start of 2025 or even in the first month of 2025. I think that's pretty unlikely. If the hearing finishes close to Christmas, sort of mid-December or right at the end of November, I think you'll find it quite hard to get a decision before the end of March. And I think there's another piece that's just come out this morning that suggests that the intention is that we would have an appeal processed and decided by the end of the season. I think that's wholly unrealistic. But of course, it does depend.
That's assuming that there's a necessity for an appeal.
Correct, yeah. and what the actual decision says.
Yeah. Separately, the outcome of City's current separate legal case brought against the Premier League's associated party transaction rules, set to be revealed, am I right, in the next 2 weeks? Is there a belief, Stefan, that City have achieved some success in that arbitration hearing?
Well, the article says that they've had some success, but of course that could mean anything. The follow-on tweet from Martin Ziegler says some defeats as well. So I think
really some success and some defeats.
That's what he says
from Ziegler in the Times.
Yeah. Look, I suspect you win some points, you lose some points in all of. Even if you have a heavy defeat in a case, there are some things where you get the judge or the panel siding with you. That doesn't necessarily you actually win on the outcome of the case. So it doesn't really mean much in isolation. And also, it seems a bit surprising that somebody would know that the decision is coming out in 2 weeks and would have some clarity. That said, information that I have heard just on the grapevine is there were certain elements of the hearing that City felt had gone well, and that they put some pressure on in terms of some of the cross-examination, and some of that had gone well. So I have heard those rumours, but I wouldn't read too much into it, and I certainly wouldn't read that there's some kind of deep connection between the ordering of the judgment in respect of the APT hearing and the 115 hearing. I think it's unlikely that they're deeply connected, as we've said before, and particularly because the APT stuff relates to rules that were brought in 2021 through to 2024, and all of the City charges relate to the period before that. So it's hard to see how they're directly connected, although it could give them a little bit of a boost going into the main hearing.
You see, Sammy, we're still in this strange situation that, say, you don't need to be a genius to work it out, that Manchester City come March, April, are very much going to be in the title race. And yet that could change. That could change if the outcome to the hearing suddenly becomes apparent right at the end of the season.
Depends what the sanction is, if there is indeed a sanction. So if there is no sanction, and at the end of it, everyone drops hands for whatever unperceivable reason at this moment in time, albeit I think there will be a deal done, then you have to take that into consideration. And of course, it's interesting to see. Everything will be based upon the judgment. Once the judgment comes out, people will look at the opportunity to appeal, whether it's the Premier League, and I don't know whether they have the right to appeal as well, do they? Yeah. And whether they'll have the appetite, but it'll all be based upon what the Commission determines is the outcome, and you can be granted an appeal. But if you look at what you've been judged on and you don't fancy that as an appeal, you're not going to run it. So I think it's very difficult to forecast. I've always felt that charging them with 115 offences was ludicrous. And unnecessary and over egging the pudding. I think if they wanted to charge them, they should have drilled it down onto 10 main charges and gone after them on that and focused their minds on it, rather than headline altering and showboating to a gallery. I don't know what gallery they were showboating to, but perhaps that's because of independent regulation and all kinds of things that they want to suggest that they can clean house and operate in a way that shows that they are an entity that runs itself properly. But I don't expect to see this dealt with in its ultimate form until the end of the season.
And that is very much the thinking on your part as well, Stefan.
Yeah, we talked about timescales before, and I think Simon was far further on than me in respect of that.
Well, I always believed that if Man City were to get sanctioned, which I believe they have a case to answer on, that would take it further. Once an appeal gets into play, and all of a sudden we start to argue about the peculiarities of that and the composition of it, I felt that could take us into the very mid and late 2020s.
Look, it may do. I mean, I've always assumed that everybody would follow the sorts of the set structure that we have as best we know. That set structure doesn't have strict timetables in the way that it does now have for simple PSR cases. If you remember, they brought in new rules for simple PSR cases, and City's case, in terms of all of the allegations, was specifically excluded from that simple expedited process.
Yeah.
So we are now in unknown territory. I think the complexity is going to come. If decisions are made during the season that have very big consequences, are they suspended sentences pending appeals? Do they come in straight away? If we know, for example, that the Everton penalties and the Nottingham Forest penalties came in straight away. They weren't suspended. So are we going to have a different rule for City? I mean,
right.
And if not, then what happens? Because